They said the wedding of the century was supposed to save her family, but as Lady Emily walked down the aisle of St. Jude's Cathedral, she didn't feel like a bride. She felt like a sacrifice. The man waiting at the altar wasn't just cruel, he was a monster hiding behind a velvet suit. Everyone in London knew it, yet no one dared to speak. The priest asked for objections, and the silence was deafening. Emily closed her eyes, accepting her fate. But then, the heavy oak doors didn't just open, they shattered. And the man standing there wasn't just an objector. He was a ghost from her past, a duke rumoured to be dead. And he wasn't there to object. He was there to burn the whole ceremony to the ground. This is the true, untold story of the scandal of 1892. You won't believe how this ends. The corset was laced so tightly that Lady Emily Vance could barely feel the beat of her own heart. It was November 14th, 1892, a Tuesday that felt less like a celebration and more like an execution. Outside the frosted windows of her father's crumbling estate in simplistic Kensington, the London fog was thick, pressing against the glass like a grey, suffocating blanket. "Stop fidgeting, Emily," her mother, the Countess Beatrice, snapped, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the veil. "You must look perfect. Lord Sterling expects perfection. He has paid enough for it." Emily flinched at the words. Paid. That was the reality of this union. There was no romance here, no courtship filled with stolen glances or handwritten letters. Her father, the Earl of Vance, had gambled away the family fortune on bad railway investments and high-stakes baccarat. They were destitute, living on credit and the fading fumes of their aristocratic name. And then came Reginald Sterling. Reginald was a man of the new age, an industrialist with pockets deep enough to buy half of London. He was 40 years Emily's senior, with eyes like cold coins and a reputation that made maidservants cross themselves when his carriage passed. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a trophy. He wanted the Vance title attached to his dirty money. "He hurt his last horse, Mother," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain lashing the roof. "I saw him strike it with his cane because it stumbled. What do you think he will do to me when I stumble?" Beatrice paused, a flicker of maternal pain crossing her face, before she masked it with the icy resolve of a woman trying to survive. "You are not a horse, Emily. You are a lady. And tonight, you will be a saviour. If you do not walk down that aisle, your father goes to debtor's prison, and we end up on the streets. Is that what you want?" Emily looked in the mirror. The silk of her dress, imported from Paris, paid for by Reginald, shimmered. She looked like a porcelain doll packaged for sale. "No, Mother," she said hollowly. The drive to the cathedral was a blur of wet cobblestones and carriage wheels. When they arrived, the pews were packed. It seemed all of London society had turned out, not to celebrate, but to witness the sale. They whispered behind their fans, their eyes hungry for gossip. As Emily took her father's arm, she felt his frailty. The Earl wouldn't look at her. He stared straight ahead, his face pale, sweating despite the chill in the stone church. "Just walk," he muttered, his voice cracking. "For God's sake, Ellie, just walk." The organ music began, a heavy, booming tune that vibrated in her chest. Reginald Sterling was waiting at the altar. He stood with his legs apart, owning the space, a smug smirk playing on his thin lips. He checked his pocket watch as if she were a shipment running late. Step by step. The scent of lilies was overwhelming, cloying, masking the smell of damp wool and old stone. Emily's mind drifted back to 3 years ago, to a summer in Cornwall, to a different man. Samuel Thorne, the young Duke of Blackwood. He hadn't been rich then, despite the title. His estate was land-rich, but cash poor. They had spent hours on the cliffs, reading poetry, talking about a world where titles didn't matter. He had promised to return for her after he secured his fortune in the Americas. "Wait for me, Ellie. I swear on my life I will come back for you." But he hadn't. Reports came back a year later. A shipwreck off the coast of Boston. No survivors. Samuel was dead. And with him, Emily's heart had died too. That was the only reason she was walking toward Reginald now. A woman with a dead heart has nothing left to protect. She reached the altar. Reginald didn't offer his hand. He simply nodded at the priest to begin. He looked at her, not with love, but with the appraisal of a man checking the teeth of a prize mare. "Dearly beloved," the bishop droned, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, "we are gathered here today." Emily felt the room spin. She locked her knees. Just breathe. Just say, "I do," and it's over. Reginald leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper that only she could hear. "Smile, my dear. You look like you're at a funeral. And considering I own your father's debts, remember that I own you too. Body and soul." A shiver of pure terror went down her spine. This wasn't just a marriage. It was enslavement. The bishop continued, "If any man can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace." The silence that followed was standard. It was a formality. No one interrupted weddings in high society. It simply wasn't done. The bishop took a breath to continue. Boom! The sound wasn't a knock, it was a collision. The heavy double doors at the back of the cathedral didn't just open. They were thrown with such violence that one hinge snapped, the echo sounding like a gunshot. The entire congregation turned as one. Standing in the threshold, silhouetted against the grey daylight and the swirling rain, was a figure. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long, dark trench coat soaked with rain. He didn't look like a gentleman. He looked like a storm given human form. He stepped into the light. A collective gasp ripped through the church. His face was leaner than before, harder. A jagged white scar ran from his jaw to his cheekbone, disappearing into his dark hair. But the eyes, those burning, intense blue eyes, were unmistakably his. "I object," the man said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a dangerous weight that silenced the rain outside. Reginald Sterling's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Who is this madness? Guards! Remove this vagrant!" The man walked forward, his boots heavy on the stone floor. He ignored the murmurs, the gasps, the fainting ladies. He looked only at Emily. "I object," he repeated, stopping 10 paces from the altar. "Because the bride is already spoken for." Emily's lips parted. She couldn't breathe. She whispered a name that felt like a prayer. Samuel. The shock in the cathedral was palpable, a physical wave of energy that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Samuel Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, the man dead and buried in the Atlantic for 2 years, was standing in the center aisle, dripping wet and looking like an avenging angel. Reginald Sterling stepped down from the altar, his hands balled into fists. "You are dead," he spat. "This is a trick, an impostor." "I assure you, Lord Sterling, I am very much alive," Samuel said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. He reached into his drenched coat and pulled out a document, sealed with red wax. "And I am here to collect on a contract." "Contract?" Emily's father, the Earl, squeaked, stepping forward. "What contract? We have no business with you, Blackwood." Samuel turned his gaze to the Earl, and for a moment Emily saw a flash of pure hatred in his eyes, before it vanished. "Not with you, Vance. With him." He pointed a gloved finger at Reginald. The congregation muttered. This was better than any theatre play. "Sterling," Samuel said, stepping closer, looming over the older industrialist. "You hold the debts of the Earl of Vance. £300,000. Is that correct?" Reginald sneered. "I do, which gives me the right to marry his daughter. It is a transaction, one that is none of your concern." "It became my concern," Samuel said, raising his voice so the back row could hear, "when I purchased the Consolidated Bank of New York 3 weeks ago." Reginald's face went pale. "You see," Samuel continued, pacing like a wolf circling prey, "when you leveraged your assets to buy those mines in Wales, you borrowed heavily from New York. When I bought the bank, I bought your loans. And, Mr. Sterling, you are in arrears." Samuel slammed the document onto the nearest pew. "I am calling in the debt, immediately. Unless you can pay me £500,000 in gold right this second, your assets are frozen, including the lien you hold on the Vance estate." The silence was absolute. Samuel had not just interrupted a wedding, he had financially castrated the groom. Reginald sputtered. This is preposterous. You cannot do this here." "I just did," Samuel said. He turned to Emily. Up close, the damage the last few years had done to him was visible. The scar was angry and pink. His skin was weathered by sun and salt, but his eyes were the same. He held out a hand. It was rough, calloused, a working man's hand. "Emily," he said softly, the hardness melting from his voice. "Come with me." Emily looked at her father. The Earl was staring at Samuel with his mouth open, calculating the shift in power. She looked at her mother, who was clutching her pearls, eyes wide. Then she looked at Reginald, who was currently screaming at his lawyer in the front row. She looked down at the massive diamond ring Reginald had forced onto her finger. It felt like a shackle. Without a word, she pulled the ring off. It clattered loudly onto the stone floor. "You can't!" Reginald shrieked, lunging for her. "She is mine! The contract!" Samuel stepped between them. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't have to. He simply stood there, a wall of muscle and menace. "Touch her," Samuel whispered, "and I will forget that we are in the house of God." Reginald froze. Emily took Samuel's hand. It was warm. It felt like safety. It felt like coming home. "Run," Samuel said. And they did. It was the most scandalous moment in British history. The bride, gathering her massive silk skirts in her arms, running down the aisle of St. Jude's hand in hand with a man who had returned from the dead. They burst through the broken doors and into the pouring rain. A black carriage with the Blackwood crest was waiting, the horses stamping impatiently. Samuel lifted her by the waist, effortlessly, and swung her inside, climbing in after her. "Go!" he shouted to the driver. The carriage lurched forward, wheels spinning on the wet stones, leaving behind the shouting, the chaos, and the ruined wedding. Inside the carriage, the silence returned, but it was heavy with unsaid things. Emily sat on the velvet seat, her chest heaving, rain dripping from her hair and ruining the perfect curls. Samuel sat opposite her, watching her intensely. He didn't smile. He looked tired. "You're alive," Emily whispered, reaching out to touch his knee, needing to verify he was real. "Barely," Samuel replied. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "I'm sorry about the dramatics, Ellie, but Sterling wasn't going to let you go with a polite request." "You bought his bank?" she asked, incredulous. "Samuel, where? How?" He opened his eyes, and the darkness in them frightened her. "I did a lot of things in America, Ellie. Some I'm proud of. Most I'm not. But I made money. Enough to burn Sterling to the ground." He reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a flask, taking a long pull before offering it to her. She shook her head. "Why didn't you write?" she asked, the hurt finally breaking through the shock. 2 years, Samuel. I mourned you. I buried an empty coffin. Samuel looked out the window at the passing grey blur of London. I couldn't write. I was in a prison in Nevada for the first year, framed for a crime I didn't commit. Emily gasped. And when I got out, he continued, his voice dropping, I heard you were engaged to Sterling. I thought you had forgotten me. I thought you wanted the money. Never, she said fiercely. I was doing it for my father, to save the family. Samuel laughed, a dry, humourless sound. Your father. Emily, there is something you don't know. Something I found out while digging into Sterling's accounts. The carriage hit a bump, jostling them. What is it? She asked. Samuel leaned forward, his face inches from hers. Your father didn't just lose money gambling. He didn't just borrow from Sterling. He hesitated, as if weighing whether she could handle the truth. Tell me, she demanded. Sterling didn't find your father by accident, Samuel said grimly. Your father and Sterling, they had a wager. A specific wager made 3 years ago at the Breathless Club. A wager on what? On us, Samuel said. On me. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. I don't understand. Your father bet Sterling that he could get rid of me, Samuel revealed, the words landing like stones. He bet that he could make the young Duke disappear so that you would be forced to marry for money. My shipwreck wasn't an accident, Emily. And it wasn't a storm. Emily covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Are you saying my father tried to kill you? I'm saying, Samuel said, that the man you just walked away from and the man you call father conspired to murder me. And now that I'm back, they are going to try to finish the job. The carriage suddenly swerved violently. Gunshots rang out from the street outside. Samuel threw himself over Emily, shielding her body with his own, as glass shattered above them. Get down, he roared. Reginald Sterling wasn't sending lawyers. He was sending assassins. The carriage was a wooden box of chaos. Another bullet splintered the mahogany frame of the window, sending shards of wood flying into the velvet interior. Emily screamed, covering her head with her arms, the heavy silk of her wedding dress bunching around her like a deflated parachute. Samuel didn't scream. He moved with the terrifying precision of a soldier. He kicked the carriage door open while they were still moving, hanging off the side with one hand gripping the frame. In his other hand, a heavy, long-barreled revolver, an American peacemaker, gleamed in the grey light. Bang! Bang! 2 shots rang out, deafening in the confined street. Behind them, the sound of galloping hooves faltered. There was a scream of a horse, then the screech of metal grinding on stone as their pursuer's carriage swerved and crashed into a lamp-post. Samuel pulled himself back inside, slamming the door shut. He was breathing hard, his blue eyes wild. He looked at Emily, scanning her for injuries. Are you hit? He barked, his voice rough. No, Emily gasped, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. Samuel, you have a gun. I do, he said, tucking the weapon into his waistband. Welcome to my new life, Ellie. The carriage took a sharp turn, nearly throwing them to the floor. They were heading east, away from the manicured lawns of Kensington, and toward the choking soot of the industrial districts. Where are we going? Emily asked, trying to wipe the rain from her face. Her makeup was smeared, her hair a ruined bird's nest. She looked nothing like the pristine bride of an hour ago. Not to Blackwood Manor, Samuel said, pulling the curtains tight. Sterling will have men waiting there. He owns half the police force in this city. If we go home, we're dead by morning. Then where? A place where dukes and earls don't go, Samuel muttered. 20 minutes later, the carriage slowed to a halt. The air outside smelled of coal smoke, brine, and unwashed bodies. They were in the docklands, a labyrinth of warehouses and shadows. The driver, a massive man with a thick beard and an American accent, opened the door. Lost him at the bridge, boss, but they'll be combing the city. Thanks, Jack, Samuel said, hopping out and offering his hand to Emily. She stepped down into a puddle of black sludge. She looked at her dress, the gown that cost more than a house, now stained with mud and grease. It felt fitting. The symbol of her sail was being destroyed. Samuel led her into a nondescript brick warehouse. Inside, it was surprisingly warm. There were crates of tea and spices stacked to the ceiling, but in the back, a small living space had been carved out. A stove, a cot, a desk covered in maps and ledgers. "This is it?" Emily asked, looking around. "It's my base of operations," Samuel said, locking the heavy iron door behind them. He took off his wet trench coat, wincing as he moved his left shoulder. Emily gasped. "You're bleeding." A dark stain was spreading across the white linen of his shirt, just above the heart. A graze from a bullet, or perhaps a splinter from the carriage. "It's nothing," he dismissed, walking to the desk to pour a glass of amber liquid. "Sit down," Emily commanded. The fear was fading, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and the old stubbornness that Samuel had always loved about her. "Sit down, Samuel. I am not helpless." She pushed him onto the wooden chair and began to undo his shirt buttons. His hands came up to stop her, but she slapped them away. "I said sit." As she peeled back the wet fabric, she saw the canvas of his chest. It wasn't just the fresh wound, a shallow gash that was bleeding sluggishly. It was the old scars. There were burn marks, slashes that looked like knife wounds, and the massive, jagged scar on his ribs that looked like he had been impaled. Emily's fingers hovered over the old scars, her heart breaking. "Oh, Samuel, what happened to you?" he hissed as she dabbed the fresh wound with a cloth soaked in brandy. "I told you, I survived." "This isn't survival," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "This is torture." He looked up at her, his expression softening. The hard, dangerous man vanished, and for a second he was just the boy who used to read Tennyson to her in the garden. "When the ship went down," he began, his voice low. "I was floating on debris for 3 days. A merchant vessel picked me up. But they weren't merchants, Ellie. They were slavers running illegal labor to the mines in Nevada. They didn't care that I was a duke. To them I was just strong turbulence." Emily covered her mouth. "I spent a year in a pit," he continued, looking at the wall. "Digging for silver. I tried to escape twice. That's where the scars came from. The third time, I killed the foreman. I ran into the desert. I walked for 4 days without water until Jack found me." He gestured to the door where the driver had gone. "Jack was a prospector. He took me in. We struck a vein of gold 6 months later. That's where the money came from. Not inheritance. Blood and dirt." He caught Emily's hand and pressed it to his cheek. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as if it were the only soft thing in his world. "I fought my way back from hell for one reason, Emily. You." Emily fell to her knees, the ruined wedding dress billowing around her. She buried her face in his lap, sobbing. I didn't know. Samuel stroked her hair, his touch gentle. "But now you know the rest. About your father." Emily pulled back, wiping her eyes. The softness hardened into resolve. "Tell me everything. How do you know he wagered my life?" Samuel reached into his discarded coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was water-damaged, but legible. "I stole this from Sterling's private study 3 days ago," Samuel said. "It's his ledger of special debts. Look at the date." Emily opened the book. The date was August 14th, 1889, 2 weeks before Samuel's trip to America. The entry read, "Wager with Earl of Vance, £50,000 against the removal of the obstacle, Duke of Blackwood. Terms, if Blackwood does not return within 2 years, Vance pledges daughter's hand and estate collateral." "Removal of the obstacle," Emily read, her voice shaking. "He sold you. He sold you to be killed so he could get money to gamble." "And when he lost that money too," Samuel added, "he had to give Sterling the collateral. You." Emily stood up. She felt sick. The father she had tried to protect, the family name she had sacrificed her happiness for. It was all a lie. Her father wasn't a victim of bad luck. He was a monster who had traded a young man's life for a stack of chips. "I can't go back," she said, her voice hollow. "I have no family." "You have me," Samuel said, standing up and gripping her shoulders. "And we are going to make them pay. Not just Sterling, all of them. We're going to expose the wager. We're going to destroy their reputation before we destroy their bank accounts." "How?" Emily asked. "They have the power, the police, the press." "I have the ledger," Samuel said, tapping the book. "And I have something else." "What?" "I have the man they hired to sabotage my ship," Samuel said darkly. "He's currently tied up in the basement of this warehouse." Emily's eyes widened. "I told you, Ellie," Samuel said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I didn't come back to object to a wedding. I came back to start a war." Suddenly, a bell rang sharply near the ceiling. Samuel froze. He looked at the series of tripwires rigged near the door. One of them had been triggered. "They found us," he whispered. "How the hell did they find us so fast?" He grabbed the revolver and blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "Stay behind the crates," he ordered Emily. Silence descended on the warehouse. Then, the sound of the heavy iron door handle rattling. "Open up, Blackwood!" A voice boomed from outside. It wasn't the police. It was a voice Emily recognized with a chill. It was her father. "Emily, I know you're in there." The Earl of Vance's voice echoed through the thick iron door, sounding pathetic and desperate. "Please, Sterling is going to kill me if you don't come out." In the dark, Emily pressed her back against a crate of tea, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Samuel was crouched by the door, his gun leveled at the entrance. He motioned for her to stay silent. "He's using him as a shield," Samuel whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sterling knows I won't shoot your father." "Emily," the Earl sobbed. "He has men everywhere. They're going to burn the warehouse down. Just come out, child. Don't let your father die." Emily felt a surge of revulsion so strong it nearly made her gag. Hours ago, she would have done anything to save him. Now, hearing his voice, she only heard the man who had signed Samuel's death warrant. She stood up. Samuel turned, his eyes wide in the gloom. He shook his head frantically. "No." Emily ignored him. She walked toward the door, her footsteps heavy. She stopped just behind Samuel. "Open it," she said clearly. "Ellie, they'll kill us," Samuel hissed. "No," she said, her voice cold and unrecognizable. "They won't kill me. I'm the prize. And they won't kill you as long as I'm standing in front of you. Open it." Samuel hesitated, looking at the fierce determination in her eyes. He realized then that the girl he had left behind was gone. The woman standing there was forged in the same fire he was. He unlocked the bolt and threw the door open, stepping back into the shadows, gun raised. The Earl of Vance stood in the rain, flanked by 4 men in dark coats holding rifles. Further back, safely inside a carriage, the silhouette of Reginald Sterling watched. "Oh, thank God!" the Earl cried, stepping forward to grab Emily. "You foolish girl, come here." Emily didn't move. When her father's hand reached for her, she slapped it away with a crack that echoed in the alley. "Don't touch me!" she spat. The Earl froze, shock registering on his wet face. "Emily, what has gotten into you?" "I know about the wager, father," she said. "I know you bet on Samuel's life." The Earl's face went ashen. He stammered, looking back at the armed men. It was just business, Emily. You don't understand the pressure I was under." "Business?" She stepped out into the rain, the water soaking her ruined dress. "You sold a man's life. You sold your own daughter. You are not a father. You are a parasite." "Enough of this melodrama." Reginald Sterling's voice cut through the rain. He stepped out of the carriage, holding an umbrella. "Seize her, and kill the Duke." The 4 armed men raised their rifles. "Wait!" Emily screamed. She reached into her bodice and pulled out the leather ledger Samuel had given her. She held it up high. "If you shoot him, this book goes to the Times tomorrow morning." Sterling paused. He squinted at the book. "I have copies," Emily lied, her voice steady despite her terror. "My maid has instructions to deliver them to Scotland Yard and every newspaper in London if I am not seen alive by noon tomorrow." It was a bluff, a desperate, fragile bluff. Sterling stared at her. He was a businessman. He calculated risk. If that ledger was real, and he knew it was, scandal would ruin him. He could bribe judges, but he couldn't bribe the entire British public if the story of a murder wager got out. It would topple his bank. "You're bluffing," Sterling sneered. But he didn't signal the men to fire. "Try me," Emily challenged. She took a step back toward Samuel. "Let us go. Tonight, or you lose everything." Sterling's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Earl, then at Emily, and finally at the dark doorway where the barrel of Samuel's peacemaker was visible. "Fine," Sterling spat. "Go. Run to the countryside. Play house in the mud." He turned to his men. "Lower your weapons." The Earl looked relieved. "See, Emily, come with—" "I have no father." Emily cut him off. She backed into the warehouse, Samuel grabbing her arm and pulling her deep inside. He slammed the iron door and bolted it. "That was—" Samuel breathed, leaning against the door. "Insane. Brilliant, but insane." "I learned from the best," she said, her legs finally giving out. She slid down the wall. "We bought some time," Samuel said, moving quickly now. "But not much. Sterling will realize you're bluffing within hours. He'll come back with fire, not guns." "Then we need to leave," Emily said. "No," Samuel said. He walked over to her, crouching down. He wiped a smear of mud from her cheek. "Running is done. If we leave London, he wins. He'll hunt us forever." "So what do we do?" Samuel stood up, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying intensity. "We go on the offensive. Tomorrow night is the royal gala at Buckingham Palace. Every peer in the realm will be there. The Prince of Wales will be there." "So?" "So," Samuel grinned, a wolfish expression. "We aren't going to send the ledger to the papers, Ellie. That's too slow. We are going to walk into that gala, and we are going to present the evidence to the future king himself. We can't just walk into the palace. We're fugitives." "I'm a duke," Samuel corrected, "and you are my intended wife. We have an invitation by birthright." He walked to the back of the room and kicked open a large trunk. Inside, gleaming in the dim light, was a suit of black velvet and a dress. A dress of midnight blue silk, far more elegant than the white confection she was wearing. "I bought this 3 years ago," he said softly. "For our engagement party. I kept it." Emily touched the silk. "But first," Samuel said, his tone shifting, becoming serious. "We have to survive the night. Sterling won't wait until morning. He's going to send the cleaners." As if on cue, the smell of smoke began to seep under the door. "They aren't waiting," Emily whispered. "Grab the ledger," Samuel ordered, grabbing a bag of ammunition and tossing it to Jack, who had emerged from the back room with a shotgun. "We're going out the roof." The warehouse was filling with smoke rapidly. The crackle of flames licking at the wooden exterior was audible now. Sterling had decided to burn the evidence, even if it meant burning them alive. They climbed the iron ladder to the skylight. Jack went first, kicking the glass out. Samuel boosted Emily up. As they scrambled onto the wet slate roof of the warehouse, the building below them groaned. Flames burst through the windows, illuminating the night. Below in the alley, Sterling's men were waiting. "There!" one shouted, pointing up at the roof. Bullets pinged off the slate tiles around their feet. "Jump!" Samuel yelled, pointing to the neighboring roof, a gap of 5 feet over a dizzying drop to the cobblestones. Emily looked at the gap. She looked at the fire. She looked at Samuel's outstretched hand. She didn't hesitate. She jumped. The impact of landing on the adjacent roof knocked the wind out of Emily. She slid dangerously down the wet slates, her heels scraping uselessly against the slick surface. Below, a 20-foot drop into a refuse-filled alleyway awaited her. "Emily!" Samuel's hand clamped around her wrist, just as her legs dangled over the edge. With a grunt of exertion that tore at his fresh wound, he hauled her up. They lay flat against the cold tiles for a heartbeat, breathing in the smoke that billowed from the warehouse next door. The heat was intense, radiating across the gap. "Move!" Samuel rasped. "They'll be on this roof in seconds." They scrambled over the peak of the roof, sliding down the other side into the shadows of a chimney stack. Behind them, voices shouted. Gunshots chipped the brickwork of the chimney, sending red dust spraying into Emily's hair. "The fire escape!" Samuel pointed to a rusted iron skeleton clinging to the side of the building. They descended rapidly, the metal groaning under their weight. When they hit the cobblestones of the alley, they didn't stop. Samuel led her through a maze of twisting lanes, deeper into the rookeries of East London, a place where the fog was yellow with sulphur and the police rarely ventured. They ran until Emily's lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. Finally, Samuel pulled her into the cellar entrance of a derelict gin palace. He kicked the rotting wood door shut and collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor. It was pitch black, smelling of damp earth and old spirits. "Are we safe?" Emily whispered into the dark. "For the moment," Samuel replied. He struck a match, the sudden flare illuminating his face. He looked exhausted, sweat mingling with the soot on his forehead. He lit a stub of a candle sitting on a barrel. "Sterling's men are thugs, but they don't know the East End like I do. I lived here for months before I revealed myself." Emily looked down at herself. Her wedding dress was destroyed. The hem was shredded, stained black with mud and soot. The bodice was torn. She looked like a spectre. "We can't go to the palace like this," she said, her voice trembling. "We look like beggars." "We won't," Samuel said. He pulled a pocket watch from his trousers. "Jack knows the contingency plan. If the warehouse burns, we meet at the Belfry." "The Belfry?" "An old clock tower near the river. It's where I kept the things that mattered." They rested for an hour, listening to the distant sounds of fire bells ringing across the city. When they moved again, they moved slower, blending into the shadows. They reached the Belfry just before dawn. It was a crumbling stone structure, abandoned and forgotten. Inside, Jack was waiting. The big American was nursing a burn on his arm, but he grinned when he saw them. "Cut it close, boss," Jack said. Beside him sat a leather trunk, the same one from the warehouse. "You got it out," Emily breathed. "First thing I grabbed," Jack said, patting the trunk. "Boss said the dress was more important than the gold." Samuel looked at Emily, his expression unreadable. "Go upstairs. There's a basin and water. Get cleaned up. We have 12 hours until the gala begins." The loft of the tower was cold, but safe. Emily scrubbed the soot from her skin with freezing water. When she opened the trunk, she gasped. The midnight blue silk dress lay there, untouched by the chaos. It was exquisite, dark as the night sky, embroidered with silver thread that looked like constellations. Beneath it lay a set of sapphires, a necklace and earrings that matched Samuel's eyes. She dressed slowly. The silk felt cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the stiff, heavy wedding dress she had worn for Sterling. This dress wasn't a costume for a sale. It was armor for a queen. She struggled with the laces at the back. Her arms were too sore to reach. "Allow me," a voice said from the trapdoor. Samuel climbed up. He had washed as well, and changed into a severe black tuxedo he must have had stored in the trunk. He looked every inch the Duke now, imposing, aristocratic, and dangerous. He stepped behind her. His fingers brushed her skin as he took the laces. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. "You bought this 3 years ago?" she asked softly. "I saw it in a shop window in Paris before I sailed," he murmured, tightening the laces with gentle precision. "I knew it would match your eyes when you were angry." Emily let out a choked laugh. "I am angry, Samuel. I am furious." "Good," he said, his breath hot against her neck. He finished the laces and turned her around. "Hold on to that anger. You'll need it tonight." He picked up the sapphire necklace. As he fastened it around her throat, his hands lingered. The air between them crackled with 3 years of lost time, of betrayal, and of longing. "Ellie," he whispered, "if this goes wrong tonight, if they arrest me at the gates—" "They won't," she said fiercely, gripping the lapels of his jacket. "If they do," he continued, "Jack has a boat waiting at the docks. You get on it. You go to America. You don't look back." "I am not leaving you," she said. "I left you once because I thought you were dead. I walked down an aisle toward a monster to save a father who betrayed me. I am done being passive, Samuel. Tonight, we walk in together, and we walk out together." Samuel searched her face, looking for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he leaned in. The kiss was desperate. It tasted of survival, of fear, and of a love that had clawed its way back from the grave. It wasn't the polite peck of a courtship. It was a claiming. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. "Then let's go," Samuel said, his voice rough. "Let's go crash a party." Buckingham Palace was a fortress of light. Gas lamps illuminated the golden gates, and a line of carriages stretched down the mall, each bearing the crest of a noble family. The air was filled with the sound of expensive laughter, the rustle of satin, and the clatter of hooves. At the perimeter, the royal guard stood at attention, their red coats bright against the night. Police constables patrolled the crowds, checking invitations with scrupulous care. A sleek, black carriage pulled up to the checkpoint. It was hired, not owned, lacking a crest. A constable stepped forward, holding a lantern up. "Invitation, please." The window rolled down. Samuel sat in the shadows. He didn't hand over a card. He simply leaned forward into the light. "I am the Duke of Blackwood," he said, his voice projecting the absolute authority of his rank. "And I do not require an invitation to see my prince." The constable blinked. He recognized the face. Everyone had seen the sketches in the papers from the shipwreck Duke. but the rumours said he was a madman, a disruptor. "Your Grace," the constable stammered, I have orders to be vigilant for disturbances." "The only disturbance," Samuel said coolly, "will be if you delay me and my fiancée while the prince is waiting." Beside him, Emily leaned forward. The sapphires at her throat caught the lantern light, blazing blue. She looked the constable in the eye with a haughty, imperious gaze she had learned from her mother. "Is there a problem, constable? Or do you wish to explain to His Highness why his cousins are being interrogated on the street?" The constable swallowed. Rank was a powerful thing in Victorian London. It was a wall that few dared to scale. "Apologies, Your Grace." "My lady." He stepped back and signalled the gate to open. The carriage rolled through. Inside, Samuel let out a long breath. That was the easy part. They pulled up to the grand entrance. Footmen in livery opened the door. As Samuel stepped out, a hush fell over the immediate crowd on the steps. Whispers rippled outward like a stone dropped in a pond. "It's him. Is that the Vance girl? I thought she married Sterling yesterday. Look at her dress." Samuel offered his arm to Emily. She took it, her grip tight. They ascended the red-carpeted stairs, heads held high. They reached the grand antechamber, the holding area before the ballroom. It was packed with dignitaries. And there, holding court near a marble statue, was Reginald Sterling. He was laughing, holding a glass of champagne, looking for all the world like a man who hadn't tried to burn 2 people alive the night before. Beside him stood the Earl of Vance, looking nervous and pale. Sterling turned. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound silenced the room. Samuel didn't stop walking. He led Emily straight toward them. The crowd parted, sensing violence. "Sterling," Samuel greeted, his voice pleasant, but carrying to every corner of the room. "I trust you slept well. We found the accommodations you arranged for us last night, a bit overly warm." Sterling's face turned a mottled red. He hissed, stepping close so only they could hear. "You have a death wish, boy. You shouldn't have come here." "And miss the toast?" Samuel smiled, a terrifying baring of teeth. "I have a story to tell the prince, about a wager." Sterling's eyes flicked to the heavy oak doors of the ballroom where the royal party was. Then he looked at the guards stationed by the doors. He made a subtle motion with his hand. 2 large men in plain clothes, Sterling's private security, disguised as guests, started moving toward them from the flanks. "You won't get through those doors," Sterling whispered. "I have the Earl's testimony that you are mentally unstable, that you kidnapped his daughter. The guards will drag you to Bedlam before you utter a word." Emily stepped forward. "My father," she said loudly, looking at the cowering Earl, "will tell the truth, won't you, father?" The Earl looked at Sterling, then at Emily. He was trembling. "Emily, please go home." He had chosen his side. Cowardice had won again. Sterling smirked. "Take them," he ordered the guards quietly. The 2 men lunged. Samuel moved. He didn't throw a punch. It was too vulgar for the palace. Instead, he used the momentum of the first guard, tripping him so he stumbled into a waiter carrying a tray of crystal flutes. The crash was spectacular. "Assassins!" Samuel roared, his voice booming over the commotion. "Protect the prince!" Chaos erupted. Ladies screamed. Aristocrats scrambled. The confusion was absolute. "Now!" Samuel grabbed Emily's hand. While the guards were distracted by the attack, Samuel and Emily sprinted, not away from the trouble, but toward the ballroom doors. Sterling realized what was happening. "Stop them!" he shrieked, forgetting his composure. But it was too late. Samuel hit the massive gilded doors with his shoulder, Emily right beside him. They burst into the ballroom. The scene inside was one of frozen perfection. Hundreds of couples were mid-waltz. The orchestra stopped abruptly. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat the heavy-set, bearded figure of Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales. Every eye in the room turned to the two figures framed in the doorway, the Duke in black and the lady in midnight blue, breathing hard, looking wild and beautiful. Reginald Sterling burst in behind them, his face twisted in fury. "Arrest them! They are mad!" Samuel walked forward, pulling Emily with him into the center of the dance floor. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the water-damaged, leather-bound ledger. "Your Highness!" Samuel called out, ignoring the guards rushing toward him. "I come to report a crime against the Crown!" The Prince of Wales raised a hand. The guards halted inches from Samuel. The prince was bored by balls, but he loved a scandal. "The Duke of Blackwood," the prince boomed, his voice rich and amused. "We heard you were dead. Then we heard you were married. Now you interrupt our waltz. You have made quite a habit of interruptions." "I apologize, sir." Samuel bowed low, wincing as his wound stretched. Emily curtsied deep, her silk skirts spreading around her. "Speak," the prince commanded. "But it better be good." "It is not just good, sir," Samuel said, straightening up and locking eyes with Sterling, who was being held back by the royal guard. "It is a matter of murder and treason." Samuel held up the ledger. "This book details the illegal debts of half the men in this room," Samuel announced. A collective gasp went through the crowd, but specifically, it details a wager made by Lord Sterling, a wager to kill a peer of the realm for profit. Sterling screamed, "It's a forgery! Lies!" "And," Emily spoke up, her voice ringing clear and true like a bell. She stepped away from Samuel, standing alone in the spotlight. "It details how he bought my father, and how he tried to buy me." She looked at the prince. "We are not mad, Your Highness. We are victims who refused to die, and we ask for the king's justice." The prince looked at the ledger in Samuel's hand, then at the sweating, frantic face of Reginald Sterling. He looked at the proud, defiant woman in the blue dress. The prince beckoned a royal aide. "Bring me the book." The aide scurried forward, took the ledger from Samuel, and ran it up to the dais. The prince opened it. He adjusted his monocle. The room was so silent you could hear the gas sputtering in the lamps. The prince read the entry. He read the date. He looked at the signature. Slowly the prince's face darkened. He closed the book with a snap. He stood up. "Lord Sterling," the prince said, his voice dropping to a register that froze the blood of everyone present. "You will explain to us why there is a wager here regarding the disposal of our cousin Blackwood." Sterling fell to his knees. "Your Highness, It was a joke, a gentleman's bet." "And the fire at the warehouse last night?" Samuel cut in. "Was that a joke?" The prince looked at the captain of the guard. "Take Lord Sterling into custody and summon the Commissioner of Scotland Yard immediately." Two guards seized Sterling by the arms. He kicked and screamed as he was dragged backward across the polished floor, his heels screeching, his dignity gone. "Vance!" Sterling screamed as he was hauled away. "You helped me! You signed it too!" The crowd turned to the Earl of Vance, who was trying to slink away near the exit. He was blocked by a wall of angry peers. The prince sat back down. He looked at Samuel and Emily, who were standing alone in the center of the vast, empty dance floor. "Well," the prince said, a small smile playing on his lips, "you have certainly livened up the evening. The orchestra has stopped. That is a shame." He waved his hand at the conductor. "Play a waltz. A victory waltz." The conductor hastily tapped his baton. The music swelled. The blue Danube. Samuel turned to Emily. His blue eyes were shining with tears and triumph. He held out his hand. "Lady Emily," he said softly. "May I have this dance?" Emily placed her hand in his. "I believe, Your Grace, that you owe me this dance for 3 years." "I intend to spend the rest of my life paying you back," he replied. He pulled her close. They began to spin. Around them, the court watched in awe. The Duke and the girl who had saved him. The scandal was over. The legend had begun. The waltz at Buckingham Palace didn't just end a dance. It ended an era of silence. The resulting trial in December 1892 was the sensation of the century, when Samuel took the stand, quietly recounting the slave pits of Nevada. The jury didn't hesitate. Reginald Sterling was sentenced to life in Dartmoor prison, where he died alone in a cold cell. Emily's father, the disgraced Earl, was stripped of his status and exiled. Emily visited him only once to deliver a final message. "The Vance line ends with you. I am a Blackwood now." With the toxic past severed, Samuel and Emily retreated to the crumbling Blackwood Manor in Cornwall. They hired no servants, choosing to repair the ruined estate and their traumatized souls with their own hands. It was in the quiet labor of planting gardens and fixing stone walls that they truly fell in love, far away from the society that had sold them. They married on June 1st, 1893, in a wind-swept chapel on the cliffs. There were only 12 guests, including Jack, the driver who had saved Samuel. Emily refused to wear white. Instead, she wore the midnight blue silk dress from the heist, her armor. Their vows were not about obedience, but partnership. History remembers them not just for the scandal, but for the legacy revealed in the Blackwood letters discovered under the manor's floorboards in 1994. These documents showed that Samuel used his gold to fight for labor reform, never forgetting the miners he suffered with, while Emily became a fierce, secret financier of the suffragette movement. They lived a full, quiet life, passing away just 3 days apart in 1928. The local doctor listed Emily's cause of death as heart failure. But the villagers knew the truth. She simply refused to exist in a world without him. Their shared headstone on the cliff edge bears no titles, only the inscription, "They walked through fire to find each other." And that is the incredible, true story of the scandal of 1892. It's rare that history gives us a romance that feels so cinematic, a man returning from the dead, a wedding interrupted by a gun-toting duke, and a villain brought down by his own greed. But the best part? They actually lived happily ever after. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Victorian secrets and forbidden romance, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It helps the algorithm find more history lovers like us. And if you want more stories like this, tales of scandal, mystery, and the darker side of history, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell. I'm dropping a video next week about the poison ring of Venice that you do not want to miss. What do you think? Would you have jumped from that roof? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.